The Berlin Airlift started because of the Berlin Blockade, though we need to get a better understanding of what the Berlin Blockade was. Today I will be telling you what the Berlin Blockade is and how it started the Berlin Airlift. The Berlin Blockade was an attempt in 1948 by the Soviet Union to limit the ability of the United States, Great Britain, and France to travel to their sectors in Berlin. Keep in mind, their sectors lay within the Russian territory and at the time was occupied in East Germany. In June of 1948, the simmering tensions between the Soviet Union and its former allies in World War II exploded into a full-blown crisis in the city of Berlin. Alarmed by the new U.S. policy of giving economic aid to Germany and other struggling European nations, as well as efforts by the Western Allies to introduce a single currency to the zones they occupied in Germany and Berlin. With that being said, this led to the Soviets blockading all railway, road, and canal access to the western zones of Berlin. It also led to 2.5 million civilians to not have the access to food, medicine, fuel, electricity, and other basic goods. Though the Western powers then instituted an airlift that lasted close to a year, and it delivered vital supplies and relief to West Berlin. And over here is a picture of the sectors that I will talk about later, and the Soviets that blockaded all the sectors. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. In March of 1947, after communist rebellions arose in Greece and Turkey, the United States President Harry S. Truman announced in a speech to Congress that the United States would henceforth support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. And he said he would do this by giving them military aid. This policy became known as the Truman Doctrine. And the Truman Doctrine introduced a new era of global engagement for the United States. And it helped articulate the growing divide between Western democracies and the Soviet Union. Then in June, the United States Secretary of State, George C. Marshall, announced the European Recovery Program, and this became known as the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan was aimed to help Germany and other European nations rebuild after the ravages of war. This top document is the Truman Doctrine, and it's kind of blurry, but that is what the document looked like. And at the bottom is the Marshall Plan, and it is also kind of blurry, but that is what the Marshall Plan stated and what he wanted to happen. The Soviet decision to blockade Berlin. During the first half of 1948, representatives from the United States, Britain, and France met in London. They met in London in order to discuss the future of Germany. The United States and Britain agreed to combine occupied zones to create Bizonia. And as you can see, I have a picture in the top of Bizonia where it's located on the map. And they did this because their ultimate goal was to become a single, unified West German state. The Soviets learned about these plans and withdrew from the Allied Control Council. And the Allied Control Council had met since the end of the war to coordinate occupation policies between zones. In June, the United States and British officials introduced the new currency, known as Deutschmark. Showed at the bottom is a picture of the United States and British official currency. And they introduced this currency into Bizonia and West Berlin, but they did this without informing their Soviet counterparts. This led to the Soviets creating their own type of currency known as Ostmark, and they issued their currency into Berlin and Eastern Germany. That same day, they blocked all road, railway, and canal access to the Allies, and they announced that the four-way administration of the city had come to an end. The lasting impact of the blockade and the Allied response. With the blockade, the Soviets cut 2.5 million civilians into 3 western sectors. These sectors were part of Berlin, but they cut them off from access to electricity as well as food, coal, and other crucial supplies. Though this led to the United States and Britain retaining control of 3 20-mile wide air corridors. And the picture at the top shows the air corridors and what they look like. Though these corridors were from West Germany, the United States and Britain brought them into West Berlin. On June 26, 1948, 2 days after the blockade was announced, the United States and British planes carried out the largest air relief operation in history. This air relief operation transported 2.3 million tons of supplies into West Berlin, and over the course of 11 months, there were more than 270,000 flights. At the bottom is a picture of the Berlin blockade and somebody trying to get over it. Though Stalin had hoped the blockade would force the Allies to abandon their efforts to create a West German state, the Allies came up with the Berlin Airlift. The Berlin Airlift was a way for the Allies to reprovision the city. And they would do this by supplying their sectors of Berlin from the air. The Berlin Airlift was supposed to be a short-term measure, though it settled for the long haul. With that being said, the Berlin Airlift sent things from Western Europe to Tempelhof, located in the American sector, Gatow, located in the British sector, and Tegel, located in the French sector. And these were all airfields in West Berlin. At the top is a picture of a map, and it has all 3 sectors divided. At the top is the French sector, in the middle is the British sector, and at the bottom is the American sector. And to the right of those sectors is East Berlin. In the map, there are also planes that are drawn to show where the goods came from and how they were transported, and how they came from Western Europe. At the beginning of the operation, the planes delivered about 5,000 tons of supplies to West Berlin every day. By the end, those loads had increased to about 8,000 tons of supplies per day. The Allies carried about 2.3 million tons of cargo in all over the course of the airlift. And this led to most West Berliners to support the airlift and their Western allies. And at the bottom is a picture of the airlift and all the people waiting for their incoming supplies. The end of the blockade and the airlift. In the spring of 1949, it was clear that the Soviet blockade of West Berlin had failed. And it had failed in many ways. First way being it had not persuaded the West Berliners to reject their allies in the West. And the second reason being is because it also did not prevent the creation of a unified West German state. Then in May of 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany was established. Following that, in May 12th of 1949, the Soviets lifted the blockade. With the lifting of the blockade, that reopened the roads, canals, and railways in the western half of the city. And to the left is an image of a newspaper article saying that the blockade has been lifted. Even though the blockade was lifted, the Allies continued the airlift until September. And they kept the airlift in case the blockade was later reinstated. In the end, the blockade not only caused problems with Berlin, but other places and events as well. For example, it amped up Cold War tensions and made the USSR look to the rest of the world like a cruel and capricious enemy, in which it was not. It also hastened the creation of West Germany. And it also showed that the US and Western Europe share not only common interest, but also common knowledge. This then motivated to the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, which is an alliance that still exists today. The Berlin blockade may have been a hard time, but it shed light on the Berlin Airlift and how others are willing to help anybody in tough situations. Thank you.